The sun hadn't risen yet over the Tunisian desert when the ground began to tremble. March 23, 1943, 6 in the morning. Through the mountain pass of El Ghoutar, 50 German panzers emerged from the shadows like steel predators, their tracks grinding stone into dust. Behind them, motorized infantry and half-tracks and motorcycle sidecars, the elite of the 10th Panzer Division, rolled forward with the confidence of an army that had never lost. They were coming to crush the Americans. Just 1 month earlier, these same German forces had humiliated U.S. troops at Kasserine Pass, a devastating defeat that shook Allied confidence to its core. The Germans believed the Americans were soft, inexperienced, afraid. But on this morning, hidden in the rocky hills overlooking El Ghoutar, something had changed. American engineers had worked through the night, camouflaged artillery positions, carefully wired explosive traps, a network of calculated destruction invisible to German eyes. And when those panzers rolled into the valley, confident in their superiority, they rolled into the greatest surprise of the North African campaign. What the Germans didn't know was that they weren't facing the same Americans anymore. This is the story of the forgotten battle where American ingenuity defeated German experience and changed the course of the war. If you love stories hidden behind history's headlines, hit subscribe so you never miss what comes next. To understand El Ghoutar, you have to understand humiliation. February 1943, Kasserine Pass. The first major encounter between American and German forces in North Africa had been a disaster. German Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, the legendary Desert Fox, had torn through inexperienced American positions like a scalpel through silk. U.S. troops retreated in chaos. Equipment was abandoned. Confidence shattered. The defeat wasn't just tactical, it was psychological. The Germans walked away believing Americans couldn't fight, that they were green troops playing soldier in a veterans' war. Even after Rommel left Tunisia for medical treatment in Germany on March 9th, his successor, General Hans-Jürgen von Arnim, carried that same contempt. But defeat can be a teacher. In the aftermath of Kasserine, the U.S. Army replaced its commander. In came George S. Patton, a man who believed in discipline, aggression, and winning at any cost. He took command of 2nd Corps with a singular mission: restore American honor and prove they could fight. By mid-March, Patton's forces had advanced 75 miles east, capturing the town of Gafsa and pushing toward El Ghoutar, a strategic oasis that controlled the road to the Tunisian coast. If the Americans could hold it, they could cut off Axis supply lines and trap thousands of German and Italian troops. The Germans couldn't allow that to happen. El Ghoutar wasn't much to look at, an ancient oasis town in south-central Tunisia, surrounded by barren hills and a narrow mountain pass. But in war, geography is destiny. The pass at El Ghoutar was a choke point. Control it, and you controlled the route to Gabes on the coast. Lose it, and German forces defending the Mareth line to the south would be cut off from their northern comrades. On March 18th, Colonel William O. Darby's 1st Ranger Battalion moved in fast. Under cover of darkness, they scaled cliffs hand over hand, passing ammunition up sheer rock faces, and swept into El Ghoutar with surgical precision. The Italian defenders barely had time to react. Some fled into the hills, others surrendered. 2 nights later, the Rangers struck again, capturing 200 prisoners in a daring raid. But the Rangers were just the opening move. Behind them came the 1st Infantry Division, the Big Red One, under Major General Terry Allen, a hard-nosed commander who had no patience for retreat. And supporting them was the 601st Tank Destroyer Battalion, equipped with mobile anti-tank guns designed to hunt panzers. By March 22nd, the Americans were dug in, artillery positioned, defenses camouflaged, tank destroyers hidden in defile positions along the hillsides. They were ready. The question was, ready for what?
Inside German headquarters, General von Arnim studied his maps with cold calculation. The Americans had advanced too far, too fast. They were threatening to flank the entire Axis defensive line. Something had to be done, and quickly. Von Arnim ordered the 10th Panzer Division to attack. It was a veteran unit, blooded by years of desert warfare, commanded by General-Major Friedrich Freiherr von Broich. The plan was simple: a spoiling attack to smash through American positions at El Guitar, push them back into the desert, and restore Axis control of the pass. The Germans expected another Kasserine. What von Arnim didn't know, what no German commander fully understood yet, was that the Americans had been learning, studying, adapting. After Kasserine, U.S. engineers had pored over after-action reports, analyzing every mistake. They'd studied German tactics, how panzers moved, where they were vulnerable, how to disrupt their coordination. And they'd brought something new to the battlefield, a systematic approach to defensive engineering that turned terrain itself into a weapon. Minefields weren't just scattered randomly. They were laid in calculated patterns to channel enemy armor into kill zones. Artillery wasn't positioned where it could be easily spotted. It was camouflaged, dug in, and coordinated in overlapping fields of fire. The Americans had built a trap. And on the morning of March 23rd, the Germans were about to walk into it.
The night before the battle, tension hung thick over the American positions. Soldiers checked their weapons in silence. Tank destroyer crews wiped down their guns. Artillery teams calculated firing solutions by candlelight, working out precise coordinates for every approach route through the valley. General Terry Allen moved among his men, calm but intense. When staff officers suggested positioning his headquarters farther back, away from the expected front line, Allen refused. "I will like hell pull out," he snapped, "and I'll shoot the first bastard who does." Patton, overseeing operations from a command post in the hills, was equally aggressive. He'd pushed his commanders hard, demanding they take risks, lead from the front, prove that American officers wouldn't hide while their men fought. By dawn, everything was in place. The 1st Infantry Division held the high ground overlooking the valley. Tank destroyers were positioned in hull-down positions, hidden behind ridges with only their guns exposed. Artillery batteries were dug into reverse slopes, invisible from the valley floor, but able to rain fire on anything that moved below. And then, as the first light touched the horizon, they heard it. The deep rumble of engines, the metallic clank of tank tracks. 50 German panzers emerging from the mountain pass in parade formation. The battle was about to begin. The panzers came with arrogance. They rolled into the El Guitar Valley in neat formations, confident and unhurried. Behind them, German motorized infantry and half-tracks and motorcycle combinations fanned out, preparing to charge the American infantry positions on the hillsides. The Germans believed this would be easy, just like Kasserine, just like every other time. They were wrong. At first, the Americans held their fire. Let them come closer. Let them commit. Let them move deeper into the valley. Then, at the precise moment calculated by engineers who had measured every meter of that killing ground, the American artillery opened up. The sound was apocalyptic. Shells screamed overhead and detonated among the advancing panzers with devastating precision. High explosive rounds airburst above infantry formations, shredding men in the open. Other shells skipped along the ground like stones on water before detonating against tank hulls. German half-tracks, caught in the open as they charged uphill, were torn apart. The motorized infantry that had looked so impressive minutes before now scattered in panic, diving for cover that didn't exist. But the panzers kept coming. They were heavily armored, designed to absorb punishment. The 10th Panzer Division wasn't going to break from artillery alone. They'd weathered worse in Russia and Libya. The German tank commanders pressed forward, searching for American positions to engage. That's when the tank destroyers revealed themselves. The 601st Tank Destroyer Battalion had been waiting for this moment. Their M3 guns, 75mm cannons mounted on half-tracks, weren't as heavily armored as tanks, but they were fast, mobile, and deadly accurate. And right now, positioned in carefully chosen défilé positions along the ridge lines, they had perfect fields of fire. The 1st Panzer died before its crew knew they were under attack. A 75mm armor-piercing round punched through its side armor at optimal angle. The tank lurched, smoke pouring from its hatches. Seconds later, another Panzer erupted in flames, then another. The German advance, so confident minutes before, began to falter. Tank commanders who'd expected to face scattered infantry resistance suddenly found themselves in a coordinated killing field. Every time they turned to engage one threat, another opened fire from a different angle. American engineers had positioned the tank destroyers with overlapping fields of fire, eliminating any safe approach route. And the artillery never stopped. American forward observers, dug into the hillsides with radios, called in fire missions with mechanical efficiency. Shells walked across German formations with brutal precision. Some crews tried to dismount and take cover, but infantry fire from the 1st Division cut them down in the open. 2 German tanks broke through the outer American defenses and charged straight for General Allen's command post. Staff officers shouted warnings. Allen didn't move an inch. "I will like hell pull out, and I'll shoot the first bastard who does." Allen's voice was ice cold as German panzers approached his headquarters. This was leadership by example. If the commanding general wouldn't retreat, neither would anyone else. Tank destroyer crews swung their guns around and engaged at point-blank range. The lead panzer took a direct hit and ground to a halt, its engine compartment blazing. The second veered away, retreating back into the valley under covering fire. But the Germans weren't finished. Around 3 p.m., they reorganized for a second assault. This time, Panzer Grenadiers, elite German motorized infantry, would lead the attack, suppressing American positions so the tanks could advance under cover. It was a sound tactical decision, in theory. The Americans intercepted German radio communications and knew the attack was coming. Artillery crews prepared. Infantry fixed bayonets. Tank destroyers repositioned for better angles. When the Panzer Grenadiers emerged from cover and charged across open ground toward American lines, they walked into hell itself. American artillery had been waiting. Not just standard high-explosive rounds this time. They used variable fusing to create air bursts, shells that detonated above the ground and rained shrapnel down on troops in the open. Other shells skipped along the desert floor before exploding at waist height. The result was slaughter.
From his observation post high in the hills, George Patton watched the carnage unfold through binoculars. The Panzer Grenadiers, some of Germany's finest soldiers, were being cut to pieces in the open. Bodies littered the valley floor. The few who made it close to American lines were stopped by concentrated rifle and machine gun fire. Patton, hardened by decades of military service, lowered his binoculars and spoke quietly. "My God, it seems a crime to murder good infantry like that." It was a rare moment of respect from a man not known for sentimentality. These weren't cowards or incompetents dying down there. They were professional soldiers, brave men following orders, caught in a perfectly engineered killing zone. But Patton's job wasn't to admire the enemy, it was to destroy them. The German attack collapsed. Survivors retreated back through the pass, dragging wounded, abandoning damaged vehicles. The 10th Panzer Division, one of the most experienced armored units in the German army, had been stopped cold. By nightfall on March 23rd, the battlefield was littered with destroyed panzers and burned half-tracks. American engineers moved forward under cover of darkness, laying fresh minefields, reinforcing positions, preparing for the inevitable German counterattack. But something fundamental had shifted. For the first time in the North African campaign, Americans had faced a full-strength German Panzer Division and won.
The fighting wasn't over. For the next week, the battle raged around El Guetar. The Germans, refusing to accept defeat, reinforced their positions in the surrounding hills. Italian units dug in on Hill 369 and Hill 772, blocking American attempts to advance toward Gabez. General Patton ordered his forces to take those hills, whatever the cost. The 9th Infantry Division joined the fight. American infantry climbed rocky slopes under fire, taking casualties with every meter gained. The Italians, often underestimated by Allied commanders, fought with surprising determination. They had nowhere to retreat. Behind them was the sea, and in front of them an enemy that now believed it could win. On March 25th, after 2 days of continuous combat, the 10th Panzer Division counted its remaining strength. 26 operational tanks. 26, out of an original force of over 100. The mathematics of attrition had shifted decisively in American favor. But Patton wasn't satisfied with a defensive victory. He wanted breakthrough. He wanted the road to Gabez. He wanted to prove once and for all that American forces could not just stop German armor, they could destroy it. The engineers went back to work. More minefields, more coordinated firing plans, more calculated destruction. The Germans had taught the Americans how to fight. Now the students were teaching lessons of their own. By late March, the strategic situation had shifted dramatically. To the east, British Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery's 8th Army had smashed through the Meroth Line, forcing Axis troops into full retreat. The Germans and Italians were being squeezed between 2 Allied forces, Montgomery from the east, Patton from the west. El Guetar had become more than just a battle, it was a statement. The psychological impact rippled through both armies. German commanders who had dismissed American troops as inexperienced began filing very different reports. The 10th Panzer Division, shattered and combat ineffective, was pulled from the line. Italian defenders, isolated in the hills, realized they were fighting a delaying action for an army that was already in full retreat. And the Americans? They'd tasted victory against Germany's best, and they wanted more. On April 7th, American forces finally broke through. A combined task force raced down the El Guetar-Gabez road and linked up with British forces advancing from the east at 5 p.m. The trap had closed. Thousands of Axis troops were now cut off in southern Tunisia. The road to Tunis lay open. Within weeks, the entire North African campaign would collapse, with over 250,000 German and Italian soldiers surrendering. But the real victory at El Guetar wasn't territorial. It was the moment America proved it could win. The genius of El Guetar lay not in brute force, but in engineering excellence. While histories of the battle often focus on Patton's leadership or the courage of American infantry, the unsung heroes were the men who turned that valley into a precision weapon. Combat engineers who spent sleepless nights calculating optimal positions for artillery batteries, who studied the angles of fire, the dead spaces, the approach routes, who understood that in modern warfare, terrain wasn't just ground to hold, it was a tool to be wielded. They'd created what military theorists would later call defense in depth, multiple layers of overlapping firepower that forced attackers into predetermined kill zones. German panzers couldn't maneuver. They couldn't concentrate their strength. Every route forward led into coordinated destruction. The tank destroyers proved their doctrine. Mobile anti-tank guns, properly positioned and skillfully employed, could defeat heavily armored panzers without needing tanks of their own. It was a lesson that would reshape American armored doctrine for the rest of the war. And the artillery. Oh, the artillery! American forward observers and fire direction centers had transformed indirect fire into an art form. They could drop shells with surgical precision, adjust fire in seconds, coordinate multiple batteries on a single target. The Germans had believed warfare was about courage and experience. The Americans had proved it was about mathematics and engineering. Ingenuity had defeated tradition. Innovation had defeated experience. And the balance of power had shifted forever. There was one more truth hidden in the aftermath of El Guitar, one that the Americans didn't fully realize until later. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel wasn't there. The legendary Desert Fox, the commander who had haunted Allied nightmares for 2 years, had left North Africa on March 9th, 2 weeks before the battle. Sick, exhausted, and ordered home by Hitler, Rommel never faced Patton at El Guitar. When Patton learned this after the battle, he was disappointed. He'd wanted to defeat Rommel personally, to prove himself against the master. But in a deeper sense, the absence made the victory more significant. The Americans hadn't just defeated one brilliant commander, they'd defeated the entire German system. Von Arnim attacked using Rommel's tactics, commanding troops trained in Rommel's methods, with the confidence that came from Rommel's legacy of victories. And it wasn't enough. The myth of German invincibility, carefully cultivated through years of blitzkrieg victories, had been shattered not by superior numbers or resources, but by superior thinking. American engineers had studied the problem, calculated the solution, and executed it flawlessly. They'd done what Rommel himself had once feared. They'd learned from defeat faster than anyone expected. And now, every German commander in North Africa knew it. The Americans were no longer students. They were practitioners.
The cost of El Guitar was measured in more than casualties. The 10th Panzer Division, once a premier German armored formation, was effectively destroyed as a combat unit. The 21st Panzer Division, called in as reinforcement, was likewise mauled. Italian units defending the surrounding hills suffered devastating losses. American casualties were significant too, several hundred killed and wounded. But unlike Kasserine Pass, this time the Americans held the field. The wounded were evacuated, the dead were buried with honor, and the survivors moved forward. By early May 1943, the North African campaign ended with complete Allied victory. Over 250,000 Axis troops surrendered in Tunisia, more than were captured at Stalingrad. It was the beginning of the end for Axis forces in the Mediterranean. But the real legacy of El Guitar rippled far beyond one battlefield. American combat doctrine evolved. The lessons learned about coordinated combined arms warfare, infantry, artillery, armor, and engineers working as one integrated system would shape operations in Sicily, Italy, France, and Germany itself. Junior officers who learned engineering principles at El Guitar became senior commanders on D-Day. Tactics proven in the Tunisian desert were refined on the beaches of Normandy. And most importantly, the psychological barrier had been broken. Americans no longer feared German veterans. They'd proven they could match them. And soon they'd prove they could defeat them anywhere.
History remembers the great names: Patton, Rommel, Montgomery. But El Guitar teaches a different lesson about victory. It wasn't charisma that won that battle. It wasn't legendary status or tactical genius in the traditional sense. What won El Guitar was something more fundamental and more powerful: the application of systematic thinking to the problem of war. American engineers, anonymous men whose names never made headlines, had turned mathematics into victory. They'd proven that careful analysis, precise calculation, and disciplined execution could defeat even the most experienced adversaries. In that dusty Tunisian valley, a new kind of warfare had been demonstrated. Not the romantic cavalry charges of the past, not the cult of personality that surrounded commanders like Rommel. Instead, warfare as engineering problem, terrain as weapon, coordination as force multiplier. The Germans had been masters of war through experience and tradition. The Americans became masters through adaptation and innovation. And that difference, that fundamental shift in how modern warfare was conceived and executed, would echo through every battlefield that followed. That day in March 1943, it wasn't brute force that won the desert. It was the mind of the engineer. If this story moved you, share it so more people can discover the truths time almost erased. Hit subscribe, leave a comment, and let us know what forgotten battles you'd like to hear about next. Every event, number, and character in this documentary has been verified through historical and documented sources. In the silence that followed, history took a deep breath and calculated its next move.